friends. I'm going to talk to you about consciousness and judgment. But I want to place meditation and dharma talk in a nice analogy. It's like two wings of a bird. In the meditation is the first wing. We come to a stop. We settle in with our breath. We bring our mind back to our body. And we start to be present. Present for the Dharma talk. And the stopping entails that you stop your agendas, your worries and anxieties from the day, and you're fully present for the Dharma reign. The second wing is the Dharma talk of deep looking. We're going to investigate something in the detail. And this evening we're going to investigate judgment. Just where is judgment located in our consciousness? What caused it? How do we transform it? That's the journey this evening. And I think I would use another analogy to examine judgment, just where it's located. I will use the call center analogy. The judgment is located in a call center where the outgoing message is always judgment. But we find that the existence of judgment is a little bit peculiar because it's not alone. Judgment is there with discrimination, with anger, with greed, with jealousy, with ignorance. And perhaps it's better to call this call center in our consciousness by its true name. It's the suffering center. And judgment is one part of it, usually driven by fear and anger. But the different parts of this judgment center, they all coalesce. They're like co-criminals in ensuring that we will be miserable and unhappy, and we will make those around us miserable and unhappy. So we're going to investigate just how this works. And if we can understand how it works, how can we transform it and be free of the ramifications of this suffering center? And judgment is just one component. It's got lots of buddies and accomplices. For instance, if you examined something like discrimination, I have a wonderful quote from Thai. He gave a answer to a question about this. And this is what he said about discrimination. When you discriminate against the basic goodness in you. You create suffering all around you, and you create suffering within yourself, and it is delusion, ignorance, that is the basis of your action, your attitude of discrimination. Those who discriminate against me do so because of their ignorance. Please forgive them, because they do not know what they are doing. If you can reach that kind of insight, you will no longer get angry at that person who discriminates against you, and you might have compassion toward him or her. So discrimination and judgment are just two fingers in the same glove, on the same hand. When you're discriminating, you will have judgment. And with that judgment, if we listen deeply to what Thai said in this answer to a question about discrimination, you'll see that judgment harms you. It cuts you off from all that is decent, fine and good in you. And this is the same with all the other companions in the call center that we will name suffering. We have ignorance, fear, oppression, wrong perceptions, jealousy, greed, hate. It could go on. And I add something new to this call center. It's called distractions. Because distraction to me means the opposite of mindfulness. And with distractions, we allow all of these other components of the suffering center to play havoc. They become the outgoing message. If we are distracted, we're not aware that what's coming out of our mind and our mouth is judgment, is discrimination, is hate, is ignorance. And one thing I think the modern world is teaching me, at least, is that the amount of distraction is enormous. With iPads, with cell phones, Facebook, Twitter, you name it, there are so many technological means of being distracted. And if we're distracted, we don't know the danger that we are in. There's a wonderful quote from Rumi. There were no cell phones during his time, but this quote really does hit the button. Rumi said, "Sit down and be quiet. You are drunk and you're standing on the edge of the roof." And I think this is what the distraction technologies do. And it's not just to young people, it's to everyone who is caught by the distraction technologies. They take us right off the roof. And while we're distracted, we have no intelligent mind working to prevent judgment, to prevent discrimination. So distraction is a means, a facilitator for the suffering call center to operate. And what the call center of suffering does, it creates a highly toxic environment within us, within the people we apply our judgments and discrimination to. And our work suffers, our home suffers, and our mind suffers deeply. Now, what creates this call center that I'm going to call suffering? For the moment, it does have another name, but I'll come on to that. And more importantly, what feeds it? We know that distraction enables the suffering center to operate with judgment and discrimination. What feeds it? We have to go back to Shariputra, who was one of the Buddha's most intelligent disciples. And Shariputra, when he was talking about the four nutriments, edible food, sensory input food, the food of volition, and the food of consciousness, he said nothing survives without food. So if we can somehow have the intelligence or presence of mind to find out what is feeding the suffering center, we take steps to cut it off. Very simple in terms of logic, but not so easy to put into application. So we have to find out what feeds our judgments, what feeds our discrimination, our ignorance. So we need tools. And the tools that we develop every time we come together to meditate, to practice together. We're developing mindfulness, concentration, and insight. And these three tools create a particular kind of energy that will transform our healing. It will penetrate the suffering center And it will start to heal the seeds of discrimination, of judgment, of hate that is in that call center. So our main tools are the tools of practice. All our practices that develop mindfulness, concentration and insight. And there are many practices. We do different practices at different times in the sangha, but when we're doing a sitting meditation and a walking meditation or a ceremony, we are nurturing seeds of wholesomeness within our consciousness, which then enable us to deal with the suffering center. And in the investigation, we also need a particular kind of attitude. That comes from the teachings on no self. We need the attitude that this mind is not my mind. It belongs to my students, it belongs to my children, it belongs to my friends. And because of that, I must be careful what I put in my mind, what I entertain in my mind. And this body is not mine. It is my ancestors' body. It is my ancestors' continuation. It is my descendants. It belongs to my students and my friends. Therefore, I must be very careful about what I put into my body. So when we bring that sense of non-self, that we're not this separated individual with a unique mind and a unique body, that we belong to a vast continuum of people before and after us. That kind of attitude will assist us in identifying the aspects of mind that cultivate this call center, which for the moment I'm calling the call center of suffering. See, the focus on judgment is to just get us into suffering. It is only one of the aspects or manifestations of suffering. So this is our investigation this evening, but I want to give you a tip, a little mantra that will help you on the journey. And the mantra is this: mindfulness and sangha always pull you through. When you practice with the sangha, you participate in an energy that you cannot create. You can participate in it, but you can't create the energy of a sangha or a community like this. You can participate in it and benefit from it. It's a collective energy that a mindfulness community like Pinegate creates. And I often see friends who are not feeling too good, or they're unhappy and they feel they can't come, and I just say, come. Doesn't matter how unhappy or out of sorts you are, just be there and allow the energy of the community to lift whatever is troubling you. And more often than not, that occurs. And the other element of a community of practice like Pinegate is the notion of cornerstones, which I've talked about a few times to you. That when you meet outside of sangha with 3 people, or 4 or 5, and you meet just to create harmony, there may be difficulties that you want to share, and you have friends who will listen deeply to you, but basically you're creating harmony. And that cornerstone produces an energy signature that's brought back into the Pinegate Meditation Hall whenever any one of that cornerstone visits. So mindfulness and sangha always pulls you through. That's a sort of a mantra to hold on to when things really are going down the drain and you can't stand it anymore. Just remember that mindfulness and sangha practice will bring you through. So let us begin simply with this investigation so that our understanding can deepen bit by bit. Before I come on to a simple healing model, there are two aspects that I want to bring to your attention. The first one is that we must be able to gladden our mind. Because in our mind, there is so much. There is junk, there is wonder, and then there's neutral stuff in between. And often the junk and the garbage and the negativity is what preoccupies us, and that's what takes us down. But we can deliberately gladden our minds. We can emphasize the wholesome features in our mind, the positive features, nurture them and bring them into our everyday life. And we can be aware of the negative and unwholesome seeds in our mind and decide, okay, we'll give them a pass today. So the constant gladdening of the mind is something that we start to do every day. And in the suffering center, there's one element that feeds all the other aspects of suffering, and this is fear. Most people are fear-driven in our society, and this is what leads to anger, hatred, judgment, discrimination. And I'd like to bring to your attention the Buddha's tenderness. He was aware of what drives people to suffer. And he identified fear. He gave us a wonderful meditation called the 5 Remembrances. I am of the nature to grow old. I cannot escape old age. I am of the nature to die. I cannot escape death. I am of the nature to get sick. I cannot escape sickness. All that I cherish today, I will have to let go. I cannot escape letting go of all I cherish. I am the inheritance of my actions. I cannot escape the consequences of my actions. And with this meditation, what the Buddha was giving to us was a focus on the 5 big existential fears. So if we can face these fears, all the other fears are small potatoes. Because these are really very big fears. And we tend to have an avoidance strategy to being sick, to dying, to recognizing that we will lose loved ones, and to be aware that the only inheritance we have is the consequences of our actions. Not how many millions of dollars we leave in the bank when we die. We don't have that. All we inherit are the consequences of our actions. This is a wonderful meditation, and I think in a future session we will concentrate on that. So to come to a simple model of healing, which will take the investigation a little bit further. If you look at the chart, this big circle, that's one way of representing our consciousness. And for the moment, let us divide it into 2 parts. Mind consciousness and store consciousness. Store consciousness means exactly what it says. It stores everything. Absolutely everything. Not everything from our own experience, but it stores our ancestors' experience. The good, the bad, and the ugly. We've got seeds in our store consciousness from our personal experience, from our inherited experience, and from our species experience. So we have to be aware that in terms of negative seeds, unwholesome seeds, we have Pol Pot and Hitler in our store consciousness. But in terms of our wholesome seeds, in red over here, we have the love of Jesus, the compassion of the Buddha. So it all depends on what we feed, what manifests within us. And here we come back to MCI. I always like to think of that as, you know, the YMCA. We should make a song about MCI. But mindfulness, concentration and insight reinforces all these seeds of mindfulness. It makes them stronger. So the more we practice meditation, the more we cultivate mindfulness, concentration and insight, the stronger we make the wholesome seeds in our consciousness. Now, in store consciousness, everything is latent, both the positive, the negative, and the neutral seeds, which I haven't put in there. But something can arise internally or be provoked by an external stimulus. And let's talk about something that we're all familiar with, is anger. Something stimulates anger in our store consciousness. This is like the basement. So it comes up into the living room of the mind. And it stays there. And the mind level of consciousness is the ability to interpret what we think reality is. You realize why I'm choosing my words carefully later. So this comes up into the mind. And if anger is left in the mind without any recompense, it's going to be shared. It's going to damage other people. The cat is going to be kicked, and we're going to feel awful. So in Buddhism, what we do, when we notice that anger has come up from a store consciousness and is now manifesting in our mind, we must bring up a seed of mindfulness, which is a different energy, and we hold our anger with intelligence. You're using something like walking meditation and holding the anger that's in your mind and calming yourself. In breath, out breath. So you're learning to respond rather than react. But here's the kicker. If you don't have a mindfulness practice, how can you make mindfulness strong enough to be effective? If you have a poor practice and you think, okay, I'm now angry, oh, I'll pull up the seed of mindfulness. It's like getting a flea to deal with an elephant. It's not going to happen. So we need daily, diligent practice of mindfulness, concentration and insight in order to make the seeds of mindfulness strong. Now let me give you an example of how we can make these seeds strong. There's a wonderful meditation from the Buddha, the 4 Brahma-Viharas meditation on love. Love, compassion, joy and equanimity. If you do that meditation every day, you're making love stronger, compassion stronger, joy and equanimity stronger. You are making these seeds stronger. And what we have to remember about levels of consciousness, whether it's mind or store, is that it's quite plastic, organic and malleable. As these seeds get stronger, they start to dilute the energy of the negative seeds. So the Buddha's teaching on love, called the 4 Brahma-Viharas, love, compassion, joy and equanimity, these are the heavy hitters. They hit the ball right out of the ballpark. So if you cultivate these 4 aspects of wholesome seeds in star consciousness, you make all the other seeds of wholesomeness stronger. You dilute these seeds. So there's an organic plasticity in each level. Our mind isn't fixed. We begin to realize, okay, we've got Hitler and Pol Pot in our star consciousness, but we can do something about it. We can cultivate wholesome seeds of mindfulness so that they dilute the negative seeds. And this is why Thich Nhat Hanh's book about the mind was called Transformation at the Base. Transformation doesn't take place in the mind, which a lot of modern psychotherapy insists it can. Transformation takes place in the base, in star consciousness. You have to change the nature of the seeds. You strengthen the wholesome seeds. You dilute the unwholesome seeds. So to make changes in our mind, we all can identify aspects of our mind that are not too healthy, that are harmful both to others and to ourselves. If we want to change our mind, we have to put in the mileage. Daily, diligent practice. It's not a one-step dance. It's a multiple-step dance. Daily, diligent practice. To feed the seeds of mindfulness so that when anger or fear or anxiety come up in our mind, we know we can have an energy of mindfulness to surround it. We know what meditation to do. For instance, if we're angry, let's say with the seed of anger, if we are really angry, we know we can do walking meditation and basically walk the anger out of us. Or we can use the Soham meditation with internal tones and place the anger between those tones so that that energy dissipates. This is using mindfulness to take care of the seed of anger. And the seed of anger will recede back into star consciousness, only it will be weaker. It'll still be there, it can still be triggered, but it will be weaker. And from this very simple model, we have the whole nature of Buddhist psychology starting to emerge. And the point about each level of consciousness, star or mind, being plastic and malleable, this has led to the very new and exciting science of neuroplasticity, which is very, very exciting. I encourage students at the university to get into that area because it's consciousness, it's physics, it's biochemistry, it's everything. And it's really the future because it's showing that we do not have to be stuck with the minds that we've got. We can change them. But there's work to do, mostly to do with cultivating mindfulness, concentration and insight. Now this is the simple model of consciousness. I have to tell you that it gets more complicated. So let's go on to look at 8 levels of consciousness. This is what we're dealing with. Once again, we have the circle, which explains our consciousness. We have mind up here. We have star down here. In mind consciousness, you also have the consciousness of eyes, ears, nose, tongue and body, all the senses. And it's the mind that interprets, orders and catalogues what comes in through our senses. Sometimes, the reason I've only put it over half the circle of mind, because when the mind switches off, either in deep sleep or trance or deep meditation, these aspects work with star consciousness. We've all experienced moments where we're on sort of automatic pilot. I drove the car home, but I have no idea how I drove it home, because the mind wasn't working, but store consciousness kind of took over. So, but that's more complicated, and I'm not going to get into that. But there's something else. And this is a key to understanding consciousness, and in particular, the object of investigation tonight, judgment. There is another level of consciousness called manas. This is the call center for suffering, for judgment, discrimination, ignorance, hatred, greed, jealousy. What creates it? Your negative seeds, which are in store consciousness, like hate, jealousy, discrimination, they're sticky. They glom onto one another. It's like a collection of garbage going down the sewer. They all clump together, and they created this default position in the mind. And we could ask a question, okay, all these negative seeds clump together, such as hate, jealousy, discrimination, delusion. Why couldn't all the wholesome seeds, like love, compassion, joy, and equanimity, why don't they clump together and become the default position? And I think the reason is this: they're a different kind of energy. They're not sticky. They don't glom on. They're interconnected, but they don't glom together the way these guys do. Hate demands allies. If you hate somebody, you want your best friends to also hate that person. It demands kind of complicity. Love doesn't demand that kind of complicity. Love is much more pristine. It is interconnected with compassion, joy, and equanimity, but it doesn't glom on together. Because I puzzled for a long time, okay, why do we have the negative seeds glomming together to create this new level of consciousness, which is a separating level? It's designed to separate and cause suffering. It's not designed to create harmony. And the only way I can understand it is that these guys are sticky. They glom. Hateful people tend to glom together. People who know the meaning of true love don't glom in the same way. They do interconnect, but it's not that stickiness. So that's how I understand it. Now, here's the kicker. Manas controls the mind. Okay? So what do you think we're interpreting through our senses when this distorting level of suffering is running the mind? It means we're making sense of the world in a totally delusional way. And it's a wonder we're not all in institutions. But then the world has gone quite mad, so perhaps that's a manifestation of how manas controls the mind. What we have to do, the only thing that can change the control of manas over the mind is we switch on, the mind chooses to switch on the lamp of mindfulness. So the mind can either be run by manas, distortion, delusion, ignorance, suffering, judgment, all of these good fellows. Or the mind can decide, okay, I've had enough of this. I do not want this anymore. I'm going to practice mindfulness and foster all of these seeds and diminish these seeds. Like these are the seeds that glom together to create manas. So if you can empower the wholesome seeds, diminish the power of the negative seeds. The constituent components that created manas will get weaker and weaker. And in a sense, there would not be a spiritual journey without manas running the mind. Because we have to actively cultivate and nurture our capacity for love, for understanding. We develop wisdom, caring, and we start to close down this call center for judgment. But we don't do it with the mind up here. We do it by changing what's going on in the store. Remember Thich Nhat Hanh's book, the first one he wrote about this, called Transformation at the Base. It's at the base in store consciousness that transformation takes place. So what we're doing with our mindfulness practice is that we're rewriting the programs in the store. We're making these programs stronger. We're deleting these programs. It's like the mind is like it's creating a memory stick, and we're downloading straight into store consciousness, boosting the wholesome programs, deleting the unwholesome. So what we're doing is transforming the nature of the seeds in store consciousness through deliberate and diligent cultivation of mindfulness, concentration and insight. So mindfulness practice is the key that turns on the light. And manas is so important. To me, it's the key of awakening. When we learn how to do the end run around manas, it gets weaker and weaker. It no longer clogs up the mind. The mind starts to see reality as it is, not reality as dancing to the tune of suffering. The outcall from manas no longer works. Judgment isn't going out as the call out. Discrimination is not going out. Hatred is not going out. Simply because we have done the work of mindfulness to transform, increase the energy of the wholesome seeds. And remember, this is malleable. It dilutes these seeds. It makes manas weaker and weaker. It frees the mind. So manas is key in the journey of awakening. But I don't pretend that it's easy. And the idea, the store is called the garden. This is the garden that we have to learn to cultivate. The mind is the gardener. It can either be a good gardener or a bad gardener. It's a terrible gardener when it's run by manas. Manas is known as the lover, full of deceit, distrust. And these terms were provided by, I think it was an 8th century abbot in China, who must have had some kind of experience to label the mind as the gardener, store consciousness as the garden, and manas as the lover. Manas will always make you suffer. So this is the call center of suffering. This is where judgment comes from. But it's not just judgment, it's all its accomplices. If we want to shut that call center down, we have the work of mindfulness, concentration and insight to do. Diligent daily practice with a community. The fostering of cornerstones so that the harmony is created amongst our friends who are meeting outside of the regular gatherings at Pine Gate. And they bring that harmony in, that joie. But even having said all of this, I have to talk to you about panic and trust, my own personal panic and trust. Because this made sense to me the first time I read it at an intellectual level, but I really didn't take it in deep enough until my practice deepened. And I know the first time this happened to me, I can still remember what went through my mind. I was sitting on my cushion, breathing in, breathing out. I had a Dharma talk prepared. Oh my gosh, I couldn't remember a darn word. It had all gone. Everything I had carefully prepared. Nobody home. And I really got quite anxious because I couldn't remember a darn thing. So I had enough presence of mind to breathe in and breathe out, calm and steady, and realized I wasn't brain dead. I was just trusting store consciousness to deliver the Dharma talk, not my careful preparations. So I have many prepared Dharma talks that have never been presented. And I have other Dharma talks that have come out of nowhere, but I know where it's come from. It's come from store consciousness. Because the idea is trust the store, trust the garden. But before you can trust the garden, you have to cultivate it. You have to cultivate it with your mindfulness. And you could perhaps see your mindfulness, your concentration as and insight as laser beams going right through the mind, through manas, right into store consciousness. Boosting the wholesome seeds, diluting the unwholesome seeds. And the transformation that takes place is that the components that created manas, ignorance, hatred, judgment, discrimination, you name them, have become weakened to the point that manas no longer has the power to run the mind. And that is liberation. That is the step into freedom. That is when you become rooted in your own sovereignty. And the power of mindfulness and of watering the positive seeds is quite wonderful. There's a story I would like to tell you. I think I have it here. Yes. I got this out of Jack Cornfield's wonderful book, The Wise Heart, which was published in 2008. And the story is quite poignant, but it brings home to you, I hope, how the watering of beautiful seeds, of wholesome seeds in our consciousness, plays out with magnificent and moving results. It's a story about a high school history teacher, so I'll just read it to you. On one particular fidgety and distracted afternoon, she told her class to stop all their academic work. She let her students rest while she wrote on the blackboard a list of names of everyone in the class. Then she asked them to copy the list. She instructed them to use the rest of the period to write beside each name one thing they liked or admired about that particular student. At the end of class, she collected the papers. Weeks later, on another difficult day just before winter break, the teacher again stopped the class. She handed each student a sheet with his or her name on the top. On it, she had pasted all 26 good things the other students had written about that person. And the students, they smiled, they gasped with pleasure that their classmates had noticed so many beautiful qualities about them. Three years later, this teacher received a phone call from the mother of one of her former students. Robert had been a cut-up, but also one of her favourites. His mother sadly passed on the terrible news that Robert had been killed in the Gulf War, and the teacher attended the funeral, where many of Robert's former friends and high school classmates spoke. Just as the service was ending, Robert's mother approached her. She took out a worn piece of paper, folded and refolded many times, and she said to the teacher, "This was one of the few things in Robert's pocket when the military retrieved his body. It was the paper." That the teacher had so carefully pasted the 26 things. On seeing this, Robert's teacher's eyes just filled up with tears. Same as you, eh? As she dried her wet cheeks, there was another student standing nearby who opened her purse. She pulled out her own personally folded page and confessed that she always kept with her. Others around them did the same. So what was at work here was the perception of goodness, of wholesomeness, invited by the teacher. And the simple exercise she had them do transformed their hearts. That's the miracle of mindfulness. Thank you for listening to me.